Have you ever heard of a king who had the gift of wisdom, but whose harem of 1,000 women led to his downfall? This is the story of Solomon, the wisest, richest, and most powerful king in biblical history. He made Israel great, but he had one weakness: women. His desire for women clouded his judgment, and although Solomon had everything to be the greatest king of Israel, he ended up being the worst. God granted Solomon the gift of wisdom, and he made Israel a powerful kingdom, full of wealth and trade relations with distant realms. But his harem was a lush garden made up of 700 wives and 300 concubines, each from a different corner of the known world. Princesses from Egypt with mysterious eyes, ladies from Moab, women from Ammon, Edom, and Sidon, each with their own stories and dreams, entangled in Solomon's magnificent court. Solomon's harem became a labyrinth of political intrigue and fragile alliances. With each union, Solomon sealed pacts that ensured peace for his kingdom, and each woman brought a piece of her homeland, turning the palace into a living tapestry of mixed cultures. For these unions were a double-edged sword, as they also brought the gods and practices of their countries, challenging the pure faith of Israel. So was his harem of 1,000 women the reason for his fall? In this video, we will explore Solomon's story, from his incredible legacy of wisdom to his downfall. Was he really able to control the demons? What were the consequences of his death for the kingdom of Israel? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any incredible biblical stories. Let's start in the ancient city of Jerusalem in the year 990 BC, where a new prince was born. His name was Solomon, which means peaceful and friend of God. Solomon was conceived from the relationship between Bathsheba and King David, the brave shepherd who defeated Goliath and whom you have surely heard about. But Solomon's story began marked by a dark secret: the adulterous relationship between King David and Bathsheba, who at the time was married to Uriah the Hittite, a brave soldier in David's army. In a desperate attempt to hide his sin, the king sent Uriah to war, ordering the other soldiers to leave him unprotected on the battlefield. As expected, Uriah met his death in combat. However, God's eyes were not blind to the king's actions. The death of David and Bathsheba's first son was seen as divine judgment, a punishment for the committed adultery. But amidst sadness and repentance, God showed his mercy. He forgave King David, and from that reconciliation, Solomon was born, a peace offering between heaven and earth. The young prince grew up under the tutelage of a wise and enigmatic man, the prophet Nathan. While King David dealt with the affairs of the kingdom, Nathan became Solomon's mentor and guide, shaping his mind and spirit with profound teachings and divine revelations. Nathan, with his penetrating gaze and calm voice, saw an extraordinary destiny in Solomon. Through his eyes, the prophet perceived the spark of wisdom and the promise of greatness that burned in the young prince's heart. But then Nathan began to weave a bold plan. The prophet knew that Solomon was not King David's firstborn, and there were older brothers who might claim the throne. And Nathan also harbored a dark secret. He knew the full story of the adultery between David and Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. With cunning and determination, Nathan decided to use this knowledge to his advantage. In private audiences with King David, Nathan began to plant the idea that Solomon was destined to be the heir to the throne. With carefully chosen words and prophetic visions, the prophet convinced the monarch that choosing Solomon was God's will. And bit by bit, David began to see in his younger son the promise of a glorious future. When David fell ill and his death approached, he gathered the necessary strength to reaffirm his decision.
Solomon, only 15 years old,
his legitimate successor,
knew that
who might conspire against him. However, with a resolution that surpassed his age, Solomon embarked on an extensive purge to secure his power. Joab, David's chief general who had supported Adonijah's claim to the throne, was one of the first victims of the purge. Thus, Solomon made it clear that no one was safe from his ruthless justice. And then he eliminated Adonijah, cutting off any possibility of conspiracy against him. But the young king did not stop there. With a strategic vision that surpassed his age, Solomon set out to strengthen the military force of the kingdom and embarked on forging an alliance with the powerful Pharaoh of Egypt. Thus, he took the Pharaoh's daughter as his first wife, thereby sealing a pact that promised to strengthen ties between the two nations. The union with the Egyptian princess, wrapped in silks and exotic jewels, was a success. Unfortunately, Solomon thought that uniting with powerful women from other realms was the fastest way to grow his kingdom. This thought would haunt him later. But on a quiet night, while the young King Solomon lay resting in his bed, he plunged into a deep and revealing dream. In this dream, God appeared before him, and with a resonant voice full of grace, God said to Solomon, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Solomon, with a humble heart of the immense responsibility resting on him, responded, "You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" Solomon's request pleased the Lord, who recognized the purity of his heart and his desire to rule with wisdom. God, pleased, replied, "Since you have asked for this and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be." Thus Solomon awoke from his dream, carrying with him the most precious gift a ruler could desire, the wisdom and discernment granted by God himself. This divine encounter marked a turning point in Solomon's life, enabling him to lead his people with justice, compassion, and unparalleled understanding. Solomon's wisdom became legendary, attracting people from all nations who longed to hear his words and learn from his knowledge. As it is written, "And all the kings of the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear the wisdom that God had put in his heart." This wisdom was reflected on a memorable day when two women presented themselves before King Solomon, both claiming to be the mother of the same baby. With tears in their eyes and trembling voices, each narrated her version of the story, clamoring for justice and recognition of her motherhood. The baby, oblivious to the dispute, lay in the arms of one of the women while the tension in the throne room became palpable. Solomon, with the wisdom God had granted him, listened attentively to both women. Then, with a penetrating gaze and a firm voice, he issued a decree that left everyone present astonished. "Bring me a sword. Cut the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other." A sepulchral silence invaded the room, as the attendees held their breath at the king's shocking proposal. Then the true mother of the child, with her heart torn and love overflowing from her being, exclaimed, "My lord, give her the living child and do not kill it." In contrast, the other woman, with unsettling coldness, accepted the division of the baby. At that moment, Solomon revealed his final verdict: "Give the living child to her and do not kill it. She is his mother." The king's wisdom had triumphed, unmasking the truth and protecting the life of the innocent. The true mother, moved by unconditional love, had preferred to renounce her son rather than see him die, while the impostor had shown her lack of empathy and maternal affection. The news of this extraordinary judgment spread rapidly throughout the kingdom, and the people of Israel were amazed at the divine wisdom that dwelt in their king. As it is written, "And all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice." This episode became a lasting testament to the wisdom and discernment that God had granted Solomon. His ability to administer justice with insight and compassion earned him the respect and admiration of his people, consolidating his reign and leaving a legacy that would transcend generations. However, the people still clung to ancient traditions. They sacrificed in high places on makeshift altars under the open sky. as a temple dedicated to the name of Jehovah had not yet been erected. Then Solomon set out to build the first temple of Israel, but at that moment he did not have the means to achieve the grand temple he envisioned. Then he embarked on a mission to forge a strategic alliance with Hiram, the king of Tyre, a city renowned for its construction prowess and wealth and natural resources. Solomon sent messengers to Hiram with a bold proposal. "You know that because of the wars waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build a temple for the name of the Lord his God until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, and there is no adversary or disaster. I intend, therefore, to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord told my father David when he said, 'Your son whom I will put on the throne in your place will build the temple for my name.'" Hiram, recognizing Solomon's greatness, enthusiastically accepted the proposal and committed to providing the necessary cedar and cypress wood, as well as the skilled labor of his skilled craftsmen, hammering a mutually beneficial exchange. With the materials obtained thanks to the alliance with Hiram, Solomon began the construction of the Jerusalem temple, a project that would last 7 years. The construction was carried out with unmatched precision and beauty, following divine instructions. As it is written, "The temple that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 wide and 30 high." Every detail of the temple was carefully planned and executed, from the foundations to the most delicate ornaments. The walls were lined with cedar wood, and pure gold covered every surface, creating a sacred space of unparalleled splendor. So he built the temple and completed it, roofing it with beams and cedar planks, and he built the side rooms all along the temple. The height of each was 5 cubits, and they were attached to the temple by beams of cedar. But Solomon's vision did not stop at the temple. For 13 years, the king also dedicated himself to the construction of his own palace, a majestic structure that reflected his power and wealth. It took Solomon 13 years, however, to complete the construction of his palace. Solomon's palace was an architectural masterpiece with spacious halls, imposing columns, and lush gardens. Every detail was designed to impress and reflect the king's greatness. All these structures, from the outside to the great courtyard and from foundation to eaves, were made of blocks of high-grade stone cut to size and smoothed on their inner and outer faces. The construction of the temple in Solomon's palace not only transformed the physical landscape of Jerusalem, but also consolidated the kingdom of Israel as an economic power. Then the fame of Solomon's wisdom and wealth spread like wildfire throughout the known world. Kings and queens from distant lands longed to meet the legendary monarch who had transformed Israel into a prosperous and powerful nation. Among them, one figure stood out for her audacity and determination: the Queen of Sheba. Intrigued by the stories she had heard, the Queen of Sheba embarked on an epic journey to meet Solomon personally. With an impressive entourage and exotic gifts, she arrived in Jerusalem determined to test the king's wisdom. But Solomon, with his mental acuity and divine knowledge, answered each of the queen's questions with astonishing clarity and depth. The queen was amazed, recognizing that Solomon's wisdom surpassed everything she had imagined. "But I did not believe it until I came," and she said to the king, "My eyes have seen that not even true what I heard in my land about your affairs and good are greater than the fame that I had heard." But Solomon's wisdom was not his only impressive attribute. His wealth and splendor were equally legendary. Gold, silver, and precious stones abounded in his kingdom, and his throne was a masterpiece of ivory and pure gold. The prosperity of Israel under Solomon's reign was evident in every corner of the kingdom. Trade flourished and abundance overflowed everywhere. All of King Solomon's drinking vessels were made of gold, and likewise all the tableware of the house of the forest of Lebanon was made of fine gold. Nothing was made of silver because in Solomon's time silver was not appreciated. But Solomon was not only a wise and prosperous king, but also a writer inspired by God. Through his literary works, he captured divine wisdom in words that would transcend the centuries. The books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs attributed to Solomon became jewels of biblical literature, offering practical advice, profound reflections on life, and the celebration of pure love. In Proverbs, Solomon shared pearls of wisdom that would guide future generations. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. In Ecclesiastes, he reflected on the fleeting nature of life and the importance of seeking God. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. And in Song of Songs, he celebrated the beauty of love and intimacy between a man and a woman. Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death, its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Thus Solomon, the wise and prosperous king, left a legacy that would transcend generations, a testament to God's favor on a man who sought truth and justice in a world often mired in darkness. But amidst his greatness and wisdom, Solomon made a great mistake. He succumbed to a temptation that would lead him down a dangerous path. Despite God's warnings, the king was seduced by the love of foreign women, amassing a harem unparalleled in history. As it is written, he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. The majestic palace of King Solomon, a labyrinth of stone and cedar, hid within it a secret as vast as his wisdom, a harem of 1,000 women. From Ethiopian princesses with skin like ebony to the daughters of pharaohs, whose eyes held the mysteries of the Nile, each woman was a world, a story, an enigma that the king delighted in discovering and understanding. Every corner of the palace resonated with the echo of their laughter, whispers, and songs. They were not mere shadows in his court. Each held her place in the vast political and cultural tapestry of the kingdom. Through them, Solomon wove lasting alliances, forged peace with distant realms, and enriched his knowledge of the peoples and cultures that bordered the confines of his map. However, this web of relationships was also a minefield of intrigues and jealousies, where each favor from the king could ignite rivalries that smoldered silently in the halls adorned with exotic hangings. But the splendor of his court and the diversity of his harem also brought their own shadows. Foreign gods infiltrated Jerusalem with their priestesses and rituals, challenging the staunch monotheistic faith of the people of Israel. Statues of Ashtoreth and Baal began to appear in high places, while Solomon, caught in the web of his marital alliances, found himself increasingly distant from the laws of his ancestors. Solomon, the man who had built the magnificent temple in Jerusalem to honor the God of Israel, now found himself erecting altars to Astarte, Milcom, and Molech, abominable gods of neighboring nations. Idolatry had taken root in his heart, clouding his judgment and distancing him from the divine wisdom that had once distinguished him. Then the Lord, seeing Solomon's wayward heart, was filled with anger and sadness. He who had been blessed with unmatched wisdom and wealth had turned his back on his commandments and given himself over to the worship of false gods. God, in his righteous indignation, confronted Solomon and warned him of the consequences of his actions. "Since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." God's warning echoed in Solomon's ears like deafening thunder. The kingdom he had built with such care and wisdom would be divided and given to others after his death. Disobedience and idolatry had sown the seeds of discord and fragmentation in the nation that had once been united under his reign. Solomon, the wise and prosperous king, had succumbed to temptation and strayed from the right path. His example would become a warning for future generations, a reminder that even the wisest and most powerful are not exempt from falling into sin when they turn away from God's precepts. As it is written in Proverbs, one of the books attributed to Solomon, There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. It was then that the consequences of Solomon's idolatry and disobedience did not take long to manifest. Adversaries arose from within and outside his kingdom, seeking to exploit the spiritual weakness of the king for their own ends. Among them, Jeroboam stood out, a servant of Solomon who had been secretly anointed to rule over 10 tribes of Israel. As it is written, he said, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." Jeroboam, aware of his prophetic destiny, rebelled against characterized Solomon's reign, were now threatened by division and discord. However, Solomon, in a moment of clarity and repentance, turned his heart towards God, recognizing the futility of his idolatry and the vanity of his earthly desires. The wise king poured his soul into the book of Ecclesiastes, a poignant testimony to his search for meaning and purpose in life. With words laden with emotion and wisdom, Solomon reflected on the ephemeral nature of human existence. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Through his writings, the king shared his internal struggles, his disappointments, and his eventual understanding that only in God can true satisfaction and the meaning of life be found. Ecclesiastes became the legacy of Solomon's wisdom, a reminder to future generations that the pursuit of happiness in material things and worldly pleasures is ultimately vain and empty. Only by placing God at the center of our lives can we find the peace and purpose we long for. After a 40-year reign, Solomon, the wise and prosperous king, breathed his last. When Solomon closed his eyes for the last time, he left behind a legacy of splendor and wisdom, but also a kingdom on the brink of fracture. His son Rehoboam ascended to the throne, inheriting a kingdom that already showed signs of fragmentation and discord. The death of Solomon marked the end of an era of unprecedented splendor and wisdom.